Hi, I'm Dennis Taylor, author of the Bobiverse series. And don't worry, no one's listening.
I love Ray Porter. I have used Ray Porter.
Everyone loves Ray Porter. There's no surprise whatsoever that it got Best Narrator. And he is a very large part of the reason why We Are Legion and the others took off, because he does the voices. He's an actor. He's not just a narrator. And
Right.
he brings a lot of humor into it. I mean, he did things like make Guppy sound like Admiral Akbar.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
Hey everybody, I'm screenwriter and novelist Edward Savio. Welcome to the podcast. Today we're talking to Dennis E. Taylor, the software engineer turned best-selling sci-fi author, a man who didn't even start writing until he was 57 years old, which should either give all of us hope or make us feel deeply unproductive. He's the author of The Singularity Trap, Outland, Flybot, and, of course, the Bobiverse books, where he gave us Bob Johansen, one of the most original characters in modern science fiction. A dead guy uploaded into an AI probe shouldn't be this funny, this human, or this compelling, and yet here we are 5 books in and counting. Dennis's books are packed with humor, big ideas, and enough existential crises to keep several versions of you busy for years. They're smart, funny, sneaky deep, and they make the impossible feel weirdly plausible. So grab a Bob-approved beverage, sit back and vert, and let's head into the void. And now, here's my conversation with Dennis E. Taylor.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
Dennis, I want to thank you for joining me. We're going to have some fun today. We're going to talk shop, and we can say whatever we want because nobody is listening to this.
Okay.
One of the things that I found fascinating when I was reading about you was you got into this relatively late. You didn't want to be a writer, right? That's not what you grew up wanting to do.
Well, I mean, I wanted to be a writer the same way people want to be firemen or test pilots or something like that, but it wasn't a career choice. I was a software developer for 35 years. Writing started out as essentially a dare. I was reading some free books on my new Kindle at the time. The book I was reading was less than stellar, and I, figuratively speaking, threw it across the room and said, I can write better than this. And my wife said, well, give it a try. So I thought about it for a minute and fired up Word and started typing. I wasn't taking it seriously at the time. And I actually at one point stopped and thought to myself, am I wasting my time? Could I be spending my free time better doing almost anything else? And I decided to keep going and ended up writing the first version of Outland. I self-published. I did actually try querying it through Query Tracker, but it was my first book, and I don't see anybody picking it up, honestly, in retrospect. But I self-published it on Amazon, and I started making coffee money and got some positive comments, and it was enough to make me want to write the second book, which was We Are Legion. And things just went from there.
So when you wrote the first book, did you just start? Did you have any real idea how to do it at that time?
I mean, put a hand on keyboard, type. But I've been reading science fiction since I was like 10 years old. So I've absorbed the patterns that make a novel. And I have an implicit understanding of pacing and plot and tension and stuff like that, but no training. All I did was I wrote it the way I would like to read it. And because I've absorbed thousands of books over my lifetime, it fit the general successful novel pattern, I guess.
Do you have any writers that influenced you, or you just read so voraciously it's all into the soup?
It's all into the soup. I mean, I have lots of writers that I love reading. I have my favorites and so forth, but no, I just started writing. The 2 books, Outland and We Are Legion, are broadly based on Wildside by Stephen Gould. and A World Out of Time by Larry Niven. Basically, I took the basic idea of those two books, which I really loved, and then went in a different direction with them.
Hey, that's exactly, I mean, my first novel, I was a screenwriter first, but my first novel, I went and I picked up this book called A Confederacy of Dunces. And I was in the bookstore and I read the back cover, read the first page and a half, 2 pages, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I bought the book. I had about a 20-minute walk home. And on the walk, I was imagining what this book was going to be. I read it. It's amazing. It's one of my top 3 books. It wasn't the book I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And a few years later, I went and I wrote that book.
Yeah.
The book I thought it was going to be.
I think that's the secret, the biggest single thing to keep in mind when you're writing science fiction or, any novel for that matter, is to write the book that you would like to read in the way that you would like to read it. Chances are you're fairly typical of a reader. So if you like it, other people will like it. Not everybody, but, if everybody liked the same thing, there'd only be one novel out there.
One of the other little side jokes about the title, Don't Worry, No One's Listening, is that as writers, when we're facing the blank screen, nobody's listening. There is no audience. And it's a place where we can take risks because we could always hit delete, but we've got to write the book that we want to write, like we would want to read, because we've got to be with it. We can't write for other people. I mean, if you do, I think you run out of steam.
I'm always amazed by staff writers and copywriters who will write to a script or an idea that they're given and just churn stuff out. I could never do that. If I don't feel the book, if I don't feel the storyline, it's just not going to go anywhere.
I couldn't agree more with that. So, Dennis, what we do is weird. And one of the great things about doing this podcast is I get to talk to other people that live versions of my life. We have that commonality where writers have a different way of looking at the world. So how do the people in your life deal with that? And how has that kind of affected the way you've interacted with friends, family?
I've always been a little weird. So I don't think things changed that much when I switched from a day job to writing, except that I was home a lot more and had a lot more free time. You got more flexibility, really. It's all positives. There's really no negative to the whole changeover, not that I can think of.
Do you need to be completely by yourself? Can you write in a coffee shop?
I can write in a coffee shop or McDonald's, which I do on a semi-regular basis, as long as it's not too noisy and there's not too much happening.
Do you listen with music?
Sometimes, not usually. Actually, when I want background sounds, I'm more likely to put on the nature channel. Birds and seashore and stuff like that. It's relaxing and a lot less intrusive.
I find that as well. Sometimes I need to have a driving beat. If I'm writing an action piece, I might do that. But a lot of times, especially when I'm editing, I'm listening to lo-fi music.
My favorite place to write actually is on the back patio or on the sun deck, which means I get a lot more done, spring, summer, and early fall than I do in the winter.
Same thing. My writing studio is in a walkout basement. It's got too many windows for the winter. It's freezing. We're going to get more into process, but I just want to ask you, when was the moment that you knew this was going to work, that you could step away from your day job, or were you already on that path?
No, I definitely was not already on that path. I'm a cautious individual by nature. I don't let go with one hand until the other hand has a firm grip. So this was going to be something that I was going to do on the side. And I would make extra money and I would apply that money to the credit card payments or the car payments or whatever. And I would keep the day job going and keep that paycheck coming in. It's a great plan, except that We Are Legion took off so absolutely mind-blazingly, incredibly big that I found myself literally buying my wife a new car 5 months after it was released. Legion came out September 10th, 2016, and by June 30th, 2017, I was retired.
That's fast. That's how I found you, through We Are Legion, We Are Bob. And I listened to it pretty early on because I like sci-fi, I like humor, and it hit me like a freight train because your humor just was so natural and felt so real for the characters that I found myself laughing out loud while I was listening. I just enjoyed that book so much.
It can be a problem if you're sitting on the bus or on the train going to work and you got the ear pods in and all of a sudden you just start laughing and people just turn around and look at you and it's like, oh, okay.
What's going on? So take me through the process, because the first book you self-published, and then the second book you went out, got yourself an agent. Tell me how that process went.
I mentioned before that I did Query Tractor on Outland, and I did about 50 queries and got nothing, crickets. I didn't even get very many rejections, which tells you how bad it was. When I produced Legion, I sent out 2 queries, and the second one phoned me the next day. That was Ethan Ellenberg. And he liked the story. He did the usual shopping it to all the publishers and stuff like that. The problem is that We Are Legion broke a couple of rules for new authors as far as publishers are concerned. And the biggest one is you don't start out with a multi-book series. It's got to be a single. It's an unwritten rule, and it makes sense for the publishers because they don't know how well the book's going to sell. And if they've bought a series and the first one tanks, what are they left with? Ethan wasn't able to get a publisher interested, but he did shop it to Steve Feldberg at Audible, and Steve liked it, and he offered us a contract. We didn't take it right away because Ethan was still on the traditional publishing route, but eventually we decided, okay, we'll go with Audible. I got a $2,500 advance for the first book, and Ethan told me if I can make that advance back, I should consider it a success, and we'll just move on to other books, and hopefully things will ramp up. It paid off the advance in the first week, and then just snowballed from there to the point where by the end of 2016, We Are Legion was voted best science fiction of the year on Audible.
I love Ray Porter. I have used Ray Porter.
Everybody loves Ray Porter. There's no surprise whatsoever that it got best narrator. And he is a very large part of the reason why We Are Legion and the others took off, because he does the voices. He's an actor. He's not just a narrator, and
Right.
he brings it to life. And he brings a lot of humor into it. I mean, he did things like make Guppy sound like Admiral Akbar. Colonel Butterworth sounded like Colonel Fowler in Chicken Run. Things like that. He does the work. He does the voices, and he makes it come to life.
Yeah, it was really fun to work with Ray and to hear him go through all of the different voices. And each of the Bobs, to me, has their own voice. You wanted to kind of make them carbon copies a little bit more. And it was Ethan who said,
Yeah, I actually didn't specifically want to make them carbon copies. That's just the way I was thinking of it, that they would be identical copies. But Ethan suggested that I could get more tension and more drama in the book if the Bobs would occasionally disagree and have different opinions and attitudes about things, which required some drift in personalities. I eventually came up with the whole concept of replicative drift based on that, which is turned into a major theme throughout the books. That brings up something that I think most non-writers don't realize, and in fact, I didn't realize until I started writing, which is an amazing amount of what a writer writes isn't planned. It just happens. Halfway through the book, you realize, hey, this is a thing. I can use this. And you may have to go back and do some editing, but you weave it into the storyline, and the next thing you know, 3 books down the road, it's become a major part of the process.
there's a throwaway line in Alexander X where I talk about this thing that happens in Nova Scotia, the Halifax incident, the very large explosion that actually happened in
World War I era.
It was munitions, and the boat blew up and killed like 2,000 people, destroyed half the town. And it was a throwaway line. It ended up becoming a major plot point in the third book. It was the readers who kept asking me throughout the second book when I threw another line away. And they went, what is this? That I ended up in the third book coming back and writing this thing that I had never, ever planned on writing, this whole sequence of events where we went back to that time. I think that's important for readers and writers to understand that you have to plan to a certain extent, but you have to give yourself room to be creative at any given moment because you could miss out.
Yeah, you can't be too rigid. I've said this before. I think of myself as a plotter when I write, but I'm not. I'm very much a pantser. I do a certain amount of planning. I know where the book wants to end up, but everything that happens between the opening scene and the climax is unknown territory until I get there.
I'd read somewhere where you had started writing and putting your stuff down in Excel, but then you created, as a software engineer, your own software.
The first thing I did was an Excel spreadsheet. We Are Legion, We Are Bob was a bunch of overlapping plot lines, and the light speed limitations made coordinating what the various Bobs were doing complicated. So I wrote a spreadsheet that checked dates against other dates and would automatically shift plots as necessary as I changed the dates, as I realized it takes longer than 2 years to get there, or I need an extra year here or whatever. And Excel would automatically move things around so that I would have the proper intervals. It was a little limiting because it's Excel. So I wrote a timeline program in C#, which is basically, it looks like a Gantt chart in project management. Actually, I gave a copy of those charts to Ethan for the new version of the paperbacks that they're working on. So they might even end up in the next paperbacks.
Oh, that's cool. I would love to see those with Alexander X, because some of the characters are 4,000 years old. The lead is, like I said, is like 1,500 years old. They can be in places, but 200 years ago, they couldn't just get on a plane. So I've got to know where events happen that I want to maybe talk about. So I timeline out major events in history, and then I put my characters where they have been. Like, okay, I've written or I've said this character is in Asia at this point, or Africa at this point, or America at this point. They can't be just going across the ocean.
I'll just flap my arms and fly over to England. I remember you mentioning that you were using Aeon Timeline at the time, and I knew that existed. I cannot for the life of me remember why I didn't just use that.
Which Bob would make the absolute worst roommate? Someone who no amount of money could make you want to live with them.
I don't think any of them are that bad, but Homer probably would have been quite annoying after a while. He's like that friend that turns everything into a joke, pulling pranks and stuff like that. I'd probably get fairly tired of him.
Yeah, that's interesting. I always love listening to the voice of Bob 1.
There's original Bob, which was the meatbag, and then there's Bob 1, which is the first von Neumann probe.
Those first 5 or 6 that were created really, because they've been through the whole series of books, I think that they've become more developed.
They are, in fact, a lot more developed. Their personality characteristics are pretty fixed. Like Riker, who's now Will, is, he's like Riker on TNG, let's face it, very, very rigid, kind of duty-driven, not a lot of sense of humor. I remember Commander Riker, even when he looked like he was trying to laugh at things, it looked a little forced.
I think his first direction was, please act like someone has a rod shoved up your ass the entire time. I mean, I think especially that first season. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to go deeper into the weeds on doing what we do. Don't worry, no one's listening. Stick around. We've got more with Dennis Taylor after this.
We've got a lot more to come, including going deep into the weeds on process. I want to give a big shout out to Bookster, home to a huge community of readers, for partnering with us so we can go deep with these writers. They said yes, so you can eavesdrop on our conversations. Readers, there's a lot of excellent content, recommendations, and Q&As with authors. Writers, Bookster helps you reach new readers. Whether you're a reader or a writer, check out bookster.com. And now, even though you're not supposed to be listening, back to the show.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Don't Worry, No One's Listening. I'm Edward Savio, still here with Dennis E. Taylor, who hasn't left yet. What's with the E?
Well, the E stands for Edward. Not that that's in any way significant, but Dennis Taylor is a pretty common name. There's a pool player in Ireland. There's a jazz player in New York. There's a chemistry professor. There's a porn star. Anyway, the point of it is that I decided I needed to narrow the scope a little bit, so I put my middle initial in. Great idea. Unfortunately, there's another Dennis E. Taylor on Amazon who's an author. Now, he's dead, so there's that. So far, there hasn't been any mix-up.
So let's get into the weeds a little bit on writing itself. I have my own weird process, right? And sometimes I think I can get too complicated. We talked a little bit about how you structure things. I tend to overwrite rather than trying to get out a one draft. You know, the first draft of everything is shit is Hemingway, right?
Well, first off, I have the opposite problem. I tend to underwrite. A lot of authors will write 120, 130,000 words, and then they have to pare it down to 100. I have never, ever, ever had that problem. I go to write an 80,000 word novel and I find myself hitting the end at 40,000. My first draft is almost an outline. There's a lot of narration. There's not necessarily a lot of dialogue. Characters spend a lot of time reviewing what happened rather than having it happen on screen. So I usually have to go back and actually write the scenes where, oh, we're not reminiscing about what just happened now. Now it's actually happening. That helps flesh things out.
So that's interesting. You were saying there's not dialogue, but in essence, because each Bob is telling the story, it's internal dialogue. It's more the POV of that particular Bob telling the story after the fact, like it's a log. And then you kind of have to put in the action.
It's kind of hard to explain. I think I tend to rush on my first draft. I try to get the scene in using as few words as possible. And it becomes more of a flashcard description of the scene rather than a fully fleshed out scene. But the second draft is when I go through, read each chapter or the flashcard that is the chapter and say, okay, how should this actually go? And that's when the dialogue gets in. That's when the descriptions of the aliens and stuff gets added in. The second draft is twice as long, but I will never be accused of padding or overwriting my books because I'm a sparse writer.
See, that I find very interesting because I have gone through as a screenwriter. I was very terse. I'd write on index cards, just very sparse, each scene, some indirect dialogue here and there for each thing. My problem was that when not in screenplays, but in prose, I struggle with putting it all in one spot rather than mixing it, and seeding it in. That's been something I think as a novelist has been my greatest journey, is to realize how to not give too much upfront and to give it a little bit at a time.
You're trying to avoid going into an expositional spew, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think with science fiction, that is a general existential risk because you're dealing with technology that doesn't exist or with history that doesn't exist or with biology that doesn't exist. And you want your reader to understand what it is you're seeing in your brain. Because if you don't, then you get into a situation where you're writing magic. If the reader doesn't know what the limitations of the technology are, then later on you can just throw in anything and it becomes a deus ex machina. Less is more in terms of putting that stuff in. Let the reader make some assumptions. I think that readers actually like it when you treat them as more intelligent.
When you were talking about when the readers kind of catch on to things, in the fourth book, you talked about the Prometheus expedition, right? And it's just a throwaway. And I had read all the books and I'm like, what is he talking about? I must have missed something. I went through and literally went on my Kindle and searched. And then I went online and found that you had answered somebody. Was that just something that you knew you were going to talk about in the future? Or it was one of those things like what happened with me where you throw it in and then it becomes something?
It's about halfway between the two. The line was necessary in order to establish mood for Bridget and Howard. But on the other hand, it sounded like a good opportunity to set up a future book. I'd mentioned that once I'm finished the main story arc of the Bobiverse, I'm going to start writing books, stories of the Bobiverse, which can happen in any time frame within the main timeline, including way in the future. Like I'm going to do a book eventually where the Deltons are in a steampunk technology level.
Very cool. So the main Bob storyline, we talked about this offline. You're working on your 6th book.
Yeah.
And how many books in that particular storyline?
7 is probably going to be the end. Book 7 is going to be the end of the Bobiverse main sequence, if you will. The Bobiverse is written as a future history. Every book begins where the previous one left off. You know, the timeline is moving inexorably forward. At the end of book 7, that whole arc is done. Doesn't mean the Bobs are done, but it means now I start writing things, you know, jumping around, individual stories within the Bobiverse universe.
Yeah, I like that. I would write little novellas for people who like signed up for my newsletter. They would get little novellas from the Battle for Forever series. Since it's told from a first person point of view of one character, Alexander X, I told from different points of view, different people. And it was really fun to do that because not only was it a great exercise for me and fun for the audience, there were a couple of things that I took, that I created and went, oh, I could see this back in to the main storyline as part of the history. When I knew that I was going to talk to you, I started the 4th book again because the 4th book was very different to me. You focused on one place. And then in the 5th book, you went back to where you were in the first 3, but expanding outward farther. Was that something that you were just going to write 3 and then you kind of came up with this other idea, or how did that work for you?
When I started writing the Bobiverse, my plans were very nebulous. I did have the word trilogy in my brain. But at the end of the trilogy, people were screaming for more Bobiverse. So I thought, I have to do something. Book 4 was a specific idea that I'd had for a while about Bob injecting himself into an alien megastructure. Originally, it was going to be Dyson Swarm or something like that, but I wanted to do something a little original, and I started looking at megastructures, and topopolises hadn't been used very often. Everything snowballs until suddenly you have this whole multifaceted story going on, and most of the subplots are just there to make the main plot make sense.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a different pace. Normally you would go from one place to another place to another place. Not often would you have the same Bob in the next chapter the same, and then the next chapter the same. And I thought that pacing was interesting. And then you did intersperse it with the outside world, with what was going on, which when I first picked up the book, I had such a strong feeling that it was so much about Heaven's River. But there was another big outside plot that really changed the whole direction of the Bobiverse.
Yeah, and there are some seeds in book 4 and continued a little bit in book 5 that are going to become major parts of book 6 and book 7. So there's a whole lot of continuity going on.
Very cool. So writer's block, how do you deal with it?
Oh God, not well. That's the short answer. Long answer, not well.
Do you just try to beat it? Do you walk away from it?
I walk away. I walk away for a while, and that makes my agent and my editor nervous when I do that. And I can't blame them.
How often do you communicate that they know you're having writer's block?
It's about a month. Every month or so, if Ethan doesn't hear from me, he'll, give me an email or give me a call. On book 5, interestingly, I was having writer's block, I guess about 3/4 of the way through the book. And I ended up giving the work in progress to my editor and my agent for them to read. And they made some suggestions. And it changed, good suggestions. And they changed the focus of the book. So book 5 actually went in not a different direction, but it completely changed the emphasis based on the feedback.
Feedback is good. I mean, I think sometimes we are so close to our work. I always tell people, for the most part, don't do what they say, do what they mean. Even when they don't have the right answer, they're seeing something that's a roadblock or a speed bump or something. Kind of dovetailing on that, what's the best writing advice you've ever gotten?
The writing advice that works for me the best is write what you want to read. Write the stories you want to read, write them in the style you'd like to read them, because you're best at that. The second thing would be write an interesting story, write an interesting premise. I've noticed that in writers' groups, people get a little too hung up on tropes. Oh, well, you're writing this trope or that trope, special child trope or the traveler trope. And that becomes the criticism in and of itself. But there's nothing wrong with writing to a trope as long as you do it in an original fashion and throw in a few curveballs.
Playing on that is really important. Roger Ebert had this book. He had people submit all these movie trope ideas. And one of mine was the midwife crisis. If you have never met a lead character's or a major character's wife or a husband, if it was a woman, until halfway through the movie, that character will be dead by the end of the movie. It's a guarantee. It's Goose in Top Gun. We don't meet his wife until halfway through and he is dead 20 minutes later. You got to play with tropes, but you got to turn them,
Yeah. There was a cop show series. Somebody pointed out that in almost every case, the first non-regular character that speaks to the cops is the one who did it. That's a trope that needs to be subverted.
Exactly. What's the worst writing advice you've ever gotten?
Stick to the rules in general. Don't filter, don't use adverbs. All those rules for writing, as Captain Barbossa from Pirates of the Caribbean, they be more suggestions than rules.
For the readers, as opposed to the writers, what are you talking about when you say filter?
Filtering is when instead of describing something directly, you describe it through the character's point of view. I felt angry rather than my fists balled up and I took a swing at him, which is showing, not telling. And it's great advice to the extent that new writers tend to overdo it. They tend to overdo tell rather than show. They tend to overdo filtering through the character's point of view. But you cannot apply it as a rigid rule. There are times when it's actually better than direct reporting.
Agreed. There's sometimes when you need to say, I am pissed off.
Yeah.
All right. Last question before we take a break. Most unexpected turn your writing career has taken?
Just my career. I'm still boggled by that. I still think that by rights, I should just be writing on the side while going to work every day. And here I am.
I'm so glad you're not, because I've really enjoyed these books and they give me such pleasure. And I find it funny. And it also just brings me into a world that, like you said, in a different way, I would write this story. I like the mix of comedy and tech. I love all that stuff. So it really feels like a world I want to live in. All right. Time for a quick break while we rethink everything we just said. You're listening, even though you're not supposed to Don't Worry, no one's listening.
Okay, while we're taking a quick break, I want to say thanks to my producer, Lisa Lindo, who you can't see or hear. She is the ghost in the machine keeping us all on track, or at least trying to, by telling me during these breaks what I didn't do, which is what she's probably doing right now. So when you hear out of context mentions of Lisa, that's who we're talking about. Say hi to everyone, Lisa. Like I said, you can't see her or hear her. The platform doesn't record producers. It has something to do with their magic.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
All right, Dennis, we do this thing called Laugh, Cry, Scream. It's a quick round where it's a book, a movie, a show, or a scene that really made you laugh, one that made you cry, and one that made you scream, either from fright or frustration. So what is your laugh?
I think The Martian is probably my best overall laugh. It's Matt Damon ad-libbing his way all the way through the movie. It was a good book. I really enjoyed that. There was no downside to it.
What's something that makes you cry?
It's very difficult to make me cry. I tend to see it as manipulative.
Yeah, of course.
They're having the big scene with the character is monologuing as their lifeblood flows from their veins. Take good care of Timmy. Oh my God.
There's a balance though, right? Because like sometimes we feel cheated if there really is the reality where people just, they're gone and that character's out of there. But
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. A couple of times I've seen scenes where they have characters die more realistically, and they're usually pretty shocking.
I think for me, my cry is usually someone's being lifted up as opposed to maudlin or depressing and they're trying to make me feel bad.
Yeah. That's certainly a much better way to elicit an emotional reaction like that. I tend to be more affected by things like Call of the Wild. I
Yeah.
remember the book,
Yeah.
where there's inevitable and unrepairable separation. You know, when the dog goes off into the wild and is never seen or heard from again. You know, that's a tearjerker.
I was talking with Christopher Moore, and Chris was talking about how schools kind of ruin readers because they give them Of Mice and Men. They give them that Steinbeck instead of Tortilla Flat and some of his other works, which are both poignant and funny and kind of give the common man in a more realistic sense, as opposed to something that's just going to be trying to be a tearjerker. I had actually never read Tortilla Flat until I spoke to Chris about that. And I went back and I went, you know what? If I had read this, I would have been like, I love Steinbeck. What's the thing that makes you scream?
Bad tropes, or good tropes badly done, or tropes unimaginatively done, or the same old, same old. I have found that as I've gotten older, I've gotten more impatient with movies, series, and their plot lines. Don't have time for it. When I was younger, I would watch any science fiction movie or any disaster or horror movie, no matter what, right to the end, because it was just so much fun. But been there, done that, not interested anymore.
I scream at the television a lot. I don't scream as much at movie theaters just because it's impolite, but I'll quietly fume. As a screenwriter first, I would turn in scripts all the time that were 135, 140 pages. And people are like, oh, come on, man. We need a 99-page script. We need a 110-page script. And I'm like, but I need to tell a little bit more of this story. All of a sudden, premium television came along and was like, hey, you could tell this story over 10 hours. There's a middle ground where 2 hours is too short. And then we're telling that basically same book or storyline that longer period of time where there's just times when it's like, come on. One of my favorite books to television is Slow Horses. And each season is one of the books. And they only do 6 episodes. So it's 5.5 hours. And that is just the right pacing.
Yeah, there's too many long non-action sequences.
All right. A couple other rapid fire questions. Lawyer, agent, editor, whose life do you save? You can only save one.
Agent.
Agent.
With apologies to my editor, who is a major part of my success, but it's my agent that makes me the money.
What's something you've not been asked in interviews that you wish you were asked?
Plans for other books? I mean, I've been asked that question in general, but nothing specific. And of course, that would make me start to think about what books I'm planning to do.
Right, because the Bobiverse has been something that's been important to your career, but I'm sure you have other stories you want to tell.
Yeah, I have 2 more books in me for the Outland series. I think it's probably a 4-book series. I've been asked about doing a sequel to Singularity Trap. That would be a hard one because it would involve the near destruction of humanity, but it can be done. I definitely want to do a sequel to Roadkill. And I've got any number of other ideas for standalones that I could do too.
If you weren't a writer, what incredibly unsuitable job would you have?
Well, if I wasn't a writer, I'd still be a computer programmer, actually. But that is a very suitable job for me because it's the same mindset. It suits my personality.
All right, we're going to pause the plot and maybe snack. We'll be right back. This is Don't Worry, No One's Listening.
If you are listening, despite all our warnings not to, follow the show, rate it, drop me comments and recommendations. I read them very slowly. I can be reached pretty much on all social media at Edward Savio, except, strangely, Facebook, where I'm at Edward Savio Writer. Lisa should be just about wrapping up giving her notes, so let's get back to more with Dennis E. Taylor.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
Okay, everybody, still us, still talking, still somehow allowed on the internet. This is Don't Worry, No One's Listening. I'm here with Dennis E. Taylor. Dennis, we had talked about this briefly offline. I suffer from ADHD. You had mentioned you do as well. How does that manifest itself both in what you did before writing and how has writing either helped, harmed? How are you affected by it?
I'd say I'm probably a mild case, but I have trouble. Some of the things that ADHD people have, they procrastinate horribly. They're either totally focused on something or scattered all over the place. Planning can be an issue. How it's affected me? Well, yeah, it's affected my career, certainly. I have trouble getting focused into something, and that's actually one of the sources of my writer's block. But once I do get focused into something, then it's blinders and full speed ahead.
Right.
As a computer programmer, I was not the guy that you wanted to have to cover support and documentation and user queries. I was the guy you wanted to give a set of specs to and put a computer in front of and say, we'll be back in 3 days. Give us a program. I don't handle multitasking well.
No, I don't either. I need to be a serial tasker, even if I'm going between different projects, because I handle my writer's block by sometimes working on one project and then working on another. When you hyper-focus, before you get into that mode, do you have decision fatigue? Because one of the things I think readers don't always know, writers know this, but there's a step right here where this character is. And this character literally, kind of like the multiverse idea of the world, right, can go anywhere at any time from this point. And as a writer, we need to go here to here to here to here to here to here. But we could go over here. We could go anywhere. Are you avoiding issues because you're having a problem, or is it, and once you just sit into it, you get into it?
Well, first off, I don't have a problem once I'm writing. Decision fatigue with my characters and stuff doesn't happen with me. On a couple of occasions, I've written 2 different chapters for a character based on, is he going to do this or is he going to do that? And then a while later, it will crystallize. I've got to go this way. So the other chapter just gets ash canned. I do get decision paralysis on a real life basis, certainly. If I've got too many things happening and too many things going at me, I just lock up. And then I have to, walk out metaphorically or literally and get my head back together.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I feel the same way. Once I'm in the mode, I can make decisions and I can be very decisive. Where you wrote 2 pieces, there's great things in each one of these chapters where they went in 2 different directions, but you got to let it go. And it's always hard, but
that's killing your darlings, and I do find that difficult. Some of my really well-written paragraphs and scenes and stuff like that, I've had to toss into the dustbin because they just can't be made to fit into the final version of the book. And oh well. Bye-bye.
It is the thing that stops most people, and they can't get past that. And that's what professional writers do, I think, better than aspiring writers, is that I think we can do that.
I was going to say, or we've just realized that we have to.
Yeah, the paycheck's just not going to come if you don't finish the book.
Part of the process, get used to it, deal with it. Sorry, flush.
That's a very succinct way to put it. How's your writing process changed over the years?
I've gotten more aware of how I need to write in order to write successfully. When I started, it was a grab bag of habits, and I didn't really know what worked for me and what didn't. And I think I finally focused down to the habits that worked for me. And if I could sum it up, it would be just write it, get it on paper, figure it out later.
That's good advice for everybody. It's a good advice for life. Just get the thing done. GSD.
Doesn't work for everybody, though. I was reading some posts by John Scalzi on Blue Sky just very recently, and he said that he basically edits as he goes. So he starts at the beginning of a book, writes the book, gets to the end of the book, and it's done.
That's how I write. I
That's
write
not
like that.
hard either. No.
See, here's the difference. Scalzi does that, but he does it at a speed that is very fast. I do that, but I do this in a much slower process. One of the things that I've tried in the past, and it's worked, where I've tried to write it as a screenplay first. Just get it out. Just get the dialogue and the basic stuff done. Kind of the opposite of what you do, which is you put what happens and then you put the dialogue in. But Scalzi, I do that. And that's interesting that Scalzi says that, because he's such a fast writer. He does give a finished product.
He's also a professional writer and has been for decades. I mean, he used to write newspaper columns and stuff like that. He is literally a professional writer. And I guess he learned how to do that right.
I think, see, as a screenwriter, I can do that type of stuff in a different way. I think you're right. I've talked to a couple of people now who had training in journalism, which Scalzi has had, and Jonathan Mayberry. And they've just had to be able to write that shit, get it edited, get it out, leave it behind. They've written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles.
And deadline and task focused, which is just not how I work personally. So that would not work for me. I could not be a journalist.
I agree. I couldn't either. So research rabbit holes. What happens to you? And do you have a break?
Every bit of research that I do ends up being a rabbit hole. I want to make sure I have all the facts laid out before I start. I don't want to have to go back and correct things because I just discovered that, that doesn't work, or it doesn't work that way, or something like that. Right now, I'm researching the shape of the galaxy and the directions of the Magellanic Clouds and stuff like that, because I want to know going in where everything is and how I have to deal with directions and so forth. It's a rabbit hole because I like doing research. It can be a little difficult for me to say, okay, that's enough. You've got what you need.
There's a pleasure in it. There's a great pleasure in it.
Yeah.
Here's a quick question that I wouldn't have asked you 3 years ago. I think AI has jumped in a way that we didn't think maybe this soon, this fast, perhaps in some ways. It's still way behind in other ways. How does the changing landscape of the idea of AI, or even the idea of scientific discoveries that are continuing to happen, change the way you look at what you're doing when you write something based on your research? Are you trying to stick to the research, or are you creating things that are outside of reality, so you're kind of future-proofed in some ways?
I start with the research. I start with what's real, and then I go from there. I definitely add to it. The antimatter fountain in the center of the galaxy in book 5, that's real. I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily a white hole, but something is spewing antimatter to galactic north. So I found that during my research. I added it into the book. It became part of the story. You have to accept that some of the stuff that you write about will eventually turn out to be untrue or unworkable or something
Yeah.
like that. Larry Niven with orbital mechanics for Ringworld. Fast radio bursts. I was going to write a thing where they were actually alien communications, except now they think they've identified the sources of most fast radio bursts, although I'll have to check that more closely.
Yeah.
You know, progress marches on. Things
Yeah.
become obsolete, but it's still a good story.
Right. It's the story. You're right. There's stuff from the 50s and 60s, great sci-fi that's, scientifically suspect, but the fiction part is still there. You're Canadian, you're in Canada. What's the most ridiculous thing you've ever Googled for research, and how thick do you think your FBI or the equivalent in Canada is?
Well, I've Googled a lot of weapons for the Outland series. I've Googled a lot of space stuff. I don't think I'm as bad as some writers, especially mystery writers or cop procedurals or stuff like that, secret agent stuff, how to poison people,
Right.
I'm not anywhere in that league. I'm a piker. The FBI or the CIA or CSIS or whoever it is, they're not going to be looking at me. They're going to be looking at Jonathan Mayberry. Is it Mayberry or Mayberry anyway?
Jonathan Mayberry, without the Y.
Without the Y, that's what throws me.
It always does. Like, even when I was writing it down 100 times, he did some work for Marvel on a comic book, and he still gets paychecks with the extra Y in the middle. It's funny because, like, in the Battle for Forever series, we're talking about people trying to maybe end the modern world as we know it, because these people who are 4,000 years old can't be famous anymore. They can't pretend to die like they used to because DNA and all of this stuff. And so I was on every prepper website, mailing list, all the crazy, crazy shit that comes with that. What I was talking with Jonathan about, I was talking with Mayberry about, was that you have to, as writers, we have to tell people enough so it feels real, but not tell them enough so they could actually go and do that.
Right. Or catch you on a mistake.
Yeah, that's always the case, isn't it? There's a quote I found from Charles Dickens. I was reading Demon Copperhead, and then I went back and read David Copperfield again. And at the beginning, Charles Dickens in the preface says, "It would concern the reader little to know how sorrowfully the pen is laid down at the close of a 2 years imaginative task, or how an author feels as if he were dismissing some portion of himself into the shadowy world when a crowd of the creatures of his brain are going from him forever." Do you struggle with letting go of story or character?
Well, I mean, when I finish book 7, there'll probably be a certain amount of feelings, if you want to put it that way. But as a general statement, no, I don't have any kind of ennui coming off the end of a book. Maybe it's just my computer programming training, but I mean, the idea is always that you're supposed to finish the program. It's supposed to be working. It's released to production. You move on to the next thing. That's the way I look at novel writing as well. Finish it. I get a huge sense of accomplishment, but no sadness or anything, no.
You don't miss some of the characters like in the first series where you're not doing anything right now?
The wonderful thing about that is that if I decide I miss them enough, I just write a sequel.
Yeah. No. And you're always thinking about it. Tennessee Williams, there was a reporter went down, he was in his 80s, and the reporter saw this manuscript on his desk and there were notes on it. And the reporter's like, "What is that?" And it was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And, it had been a play, a movie, and he's still rewriting it even after it was already set in stone. And Tennessee said, "It's not finished yet."
Yeah. That's one thing I never do. Well, except for Outland, which I did. Once the book's done, it's done.
What's the most surprising thing you learned about yourself through the writing?
Actually, the ADHD thing. I never would have guessed.
Well, you probably had more structure before, right? You had more structure.
Yeah.
And so when you don't have structure, it's hard. People always think, it'd be great to work out of your home. It ain't easy.
No. The tendency to procrastinate can get out of hand.
Well, because you can always do it later.
Yep.
Right. How can people follow you?
I'm on, my usual line is I'm on all the social media, but I'm not on X. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Threads, I'm on Blue Sky, and I have my own website.
DennisTaylor.com, DennisETaylor.com?
DennisETaylor.org.
.org.
Yep.
Perfect. I've been following you on Blue Sky and I enjoy your interactions. So you're fun.
Well, I'm more active on Threads.
It's Threads, actually. You're right. It is Threads that I follow you on. All right. So one last thing. So I'm the worst at getting off the phone. My kids make fun of me. I'll start goodbyes and then begin a whole new conversation. So I'm saying goodbye, but let's say we're still here a few hours from now. We've been talking offline. What's the thing that you're going to tell me in a few hours that you haven't told me so far?
I really got to pee. Yeah.
That's definitely profound.
Well, I mean, it's going to come up sooner or later.
Sooner or later. Oh, Dennis, I really appreciate having a chance to talk with you. And I know that you've got busy and important things to deal with because we got interrupted. And maybe there'll be some news from Dennis on the interwebs at some point about that. But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, Dennis.
Thanks for having me. Glad to have been here.
It's a lot of fun.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
DWNOL is produced by Lisa Lindo for Rocket Surgeon Productions and presented by Bookster. DWNOL themes by Trina Davis and Annie Musical Team. More later. I forgot. One last thing. People love to say, just use he said, she said. Nobody notices, and that's true on the page. But in an audiobook, he said, she said turns into Morse code for make it stop. If there are only two people, cut as many tags as you can. If there are more people, put action before or after what they say so we know who's talking. Your narrator and your listener will thank you.